This is the 12th Sunday after Pentecost here in Syracuse, New York. The epistle is taken from St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians, chapter 3, book 2. Brethren, such confidence we have through Christ towards God, not that we are sufficient to think anything of ourselves as of ourselves, but our sufficiency is from God, who also hath made us fit ministers of the New Testament, not in the letter, but in the Spirit. For the letter killeth, but the Spirit giveth life. Now, if the ministration of death, engraven with letters upon stones, he's talking here about the 10 Commandments, was glorious, so that the children of Israel could not steadfastly behold the face of Moses, for the glory of his countenance, which is made void, how shall not the ministration of the Spirit be rather in glory? For if the ministration of condemnation be glory, much more the ministration of justice aboundeth in glory. The Holy Gospel. Taken from St. Luke chapter 10. At that time Jesus said to his disciples, Blessed are the eyes that see the things which you see. For I say to you that many prophets and kings have desired to see the things that you see, and have not seen them, and to hear the things that you hear, and have not heard them. And behold, a certain lawyer stood up, tempting him, and saying, Master, what must I do to possess eternal life? But he said to him, What is written in the law? How readest thou? He answering said, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with thy whole heart, and with thy whole soul, and with all thy strength, and with all thy mind, and thy neighbor as thyself. And he said to him, Thou hast answered rightly. This do, and thou shalt live. But he, willing to justify himself, said to Jesus, And who is my neighbor? And Jesus answering said, There was a certain man who went down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, who also stripped him, and having wounded him, went away, leaving him half dead. And it chanced that a certain priest went down the same way, and seeing him, passed by. In like manner also a Levite, when he was near the place, and saw him, passed by. But a certain Samaritan, being on his journey, came near him, and seeing him, was moved with compassion, and going up to him, bound up his wounds, pouring in oil and wine, and setting him upon his own beast, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 pence, and gave to the host, and said, Take care of him, and whatsoever thou shalt spend over and above, I at my return will repay thee. Which of these 3, in thine opinion, was neighbor to him that fell among the robbers? But he said, He that showed mercy to him. And Jesus said to him, Go, and do thou in like manner. Thus are the words of the Holy Gospel. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. Would like to congratulate 60 years of marriage to Mr. and Mrs. Tom and Bonnie Massett. The wedding day is always a great event, but to persevere 60 years is a far greater event. And a greater thing in these days, when marriage is being attacked at every single level by the civil courts, by the whole propaganda of the Judeo-Masonic media, the movies, Hollywood, always bashing the sacredness of marriage, The civil laws are now attacking it directly by immoral laws that are being passed and promoted. And so sad, even in the church, as Our Lady of La Salette in Quito and Fatima warned, the eclipse of the faith, even by the stars and the moon and the sun that should shine bright. That is the Pope and the bishops. And the Pope unleashing a major attack against the sacredness of marriage and giving a blessing for divorce in an indirect way by permitting, which can never happen, but permitting those who are living in divorce and remarriage and living in mortal sin knowingly and willingly to receive Holy Communion. That's an indirect way of saying it's okay to live in sin. So when things are ever so dark, it is a great thing when a little candle, that is a married couple, 60 years faithful, and all of you, 10, 15, 20, 30 years faithful, even a year faithful today is a big thing. It shines bright. So we thank the Blessed Mother who put her mantle over you in 1959, August the 29th. They were married 1959, that's right before Vatican II hit. That's that would have been the Latin Mass in every parish church. And what many referred to as the good old days. So we congratulate Tom and Bonnie and pray for you in this Mass. And this Mass will be offered for you also and for your whole family and all the many children and grandchildren. And may the Massett dynasty spread far and wide. And may it ever hold high the torch of uncompromising Catholic faith. And maybe in your line there will be yet martyrs to come. And those days are very likely. Let's look at two martyrs today. Two Franciscans who were sent by St. Francis of Assisi himself. He sent these two Franciscans. One was a priest, Father John of Perugia, and the other was a brother, Brother Peter. And they were from Spain, and St. Francis sent them into the deeper parts of Spain to convert the Muslims. Because St. Francis had a burning desire to convert the Muslims, and he was fearless. He himself went to Egypt and met the Sultan and challenged the Sultan himself. I'll show you the true religion. Lay down a bed of coals and we'll both walk on it. And whoever comes off walking barefoot on the hot coals for 20, 30 feet of hot coals, whoever comes off the other side untouched adores the true God. And the Sultan, feeling his soft feet, seeing those coals, he said, on second thought, I'll decline the challenge. He never took it. But he respected St. Francis, because St. Francis came with poverty, with true zeal, true love of neighbor, to seek the conversion of the Sultan. Surprisingly, the Sultan didn't kill St. Francis, but he left him off with gifts, and St. Francis went back to Europe. That was in the Egypt area where he went. So these two went into Spain. These two friars established themselves in Teruel in Aragon, in Spain, living in cells near the Church of St. Bartholomew, and there for some time prepared themselves for their apostolate. Their poverty and lowliness won the love and attention of the people of the place, and their lives in preaching bore much fruit. They then went on to Valencia. Remember, this is 1220s. So half of Spain is still in the hands of the Muslims. And this is all still during the Great Reconquista. So Valencia was still in the hands of the Muslims. They went to Valencia, which was completely under the dominion of the Moors, the Muslims, and took up their quarters quietly at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. But directly the friars attempted to preach in public, the Mohammedans turned against them. They were arrested and brought before the Emir. He asked what had brought them to Valencia, and there they stood in their Franciscan habits and their cords and their hoods. And Blessed John replied that they came to convert the Muslims from the errors of Islam. They were then offered the usual alternatives of apostasy or death. Abandon the Catholic faith and you'll live. You profess the Catholic faith, you'll die. And of course, by the power of the Holy Ghost, they chose death and were condemned to be beheaded. The sentence was carried out then and there in the Emir's garden of his house, his palace. The martyrs praying aloud for the conversion of their persecutor. This beheading happened on August 29th, the day of your marriage, but in the year 1231. So pray to these martyrs for the rest of your years. You might have many more years yet. God knows. But here's an example of the good fruit of perseverance, of being faithful to all our vows. And probably most of us in this little chapel have made vows, and these vows were made to God. The priest makes a vow of chastity and to be a priest till the end, for all eternity. You who have made vows of marriage, you are vowed to marriage with each other till the day you die. And nothing can break that. No Supreme Court, no civil court has any authority. What God has put together, no man can put asunder. So when you're faithful to our vows, by the grace of God, and it is hard, we all know that, and especially if marriage is particularly attacked, well, so is the priesthood, particularly attacked in these times more than ever. So we need to really pray, especially to the Virgin Mary, the daily rosary, wear her scapular, so we are faithful. Without Our Lady, we're not going to be found faithful. Without her, we're not going to survive this hurricane. We won't. But with her, you will persevere to the end. And with her, you will obtain heaven. And with her, you get also many benefits. Shortened purgatory, if you wear her scapular. And many other benefits, and many other graces, and many other blessings. Remember what the Virgin Mary told Sister Lucia. There is no problem, whether it be personal, whether it be family problems, or congregation problems, or work problems, or national or international problems that cannot be resolved by praying the rosary. So the day that the president kneels down and starts praying the rosary, we'll start seeing some real solutions for our country. And when the Pope finally consecrates Russia, as they have done disobediently to Our Lady, all these popes since Vatican II, disobeyed the Blessed Mother and spit in her face by refusing and even mocking Fatima. Until that day is done, when the Pope finally obeys her, then heaven will open its graces and whole nations will be converted, and Christ the King will be proclaimed by the leader of the United States. Maybe by then it'll probably be a king. According to the prophecies of Venerable Bartholomew Holtzhausen, democracies will be finished because they don't work at a national level. Democracies only work at a town level, really, because everybody knows each other, and you can elect the one that's best for the governing. But on a national level, it doesn't work. So the prophecies say democracies and republics will vanish. It'll come back to the good monarchies. And in fact, the medieval Catholic monarchies have all three forms of government perfectly working together. Monarchy, the king, who answers to God, but his authority comes from God. And then you have aristocracy, which is his advisors, which includes usually Dominican priests and priests who are well versed in philosophy and theology, and wise men. And then also on the smaller scale, at the town level, you have democracy. So really, in the Catholic medieval system, you had the best running government of incorporating monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy all together and working harmoniously under Christ the King. So here's what happened. This is the year 1231 when they were martyred. But listen to the good fruits of their not compromising the faith and dying for the faith. 7 years later, King James I, the Conqueror, who was king of Aragon, drove the Moors, the Muslims, from Valencia with the help of his English and other mercenaries, and in accordance with the martyr's prayer, the emir became a Christian. He professed the Catholic faith and was baptized. This very one who put them to death, this Muslim. And remember, when a Muslim converts, it's serious, because they will be killed by his family, killed by his subjects. And this emir, E-M-I-R, he gave his house to the Franciscans for a friary, a monastery, saying to them, "While I was an unbeliever, I killed your brethren from Teruel, and I want to make reparation for my crime. Here then, take my house at your disposal, consecrated already by the blood of martyrs." So the bodies of Blessed John and Peter had been taken to Teruel, where miracles were reported at their tomb. And so a church was erected at the new friary at Valencia, at the very house of the converted Muslim. They were beatified in 1783. So they persevered. They stayed faithful to the Catholic faith. They stayed faithful to their vows. They died martyrs, which looks like to the world a big loss, but in God's eyes it's a huge gain. One, they go straight to heaven. Their intercession becomes more powerful. And by their prayers won the conversion of this Muslim, and this Muslim himself converts. The King James comes and conquers the territory. All of it becomes Catholic because of the fidelity of two Franciscan priest and brother. And think of the fidelity of you, Tom and Bonnie, and all of you who are married, and all of us who have made vows. Be faithful till death. And today it is a martyrdom. It's a martyrdom for a young couple to marry and do what's pleasing and right before God, which is stay faithful, take all the children God sends. Ladies, dress like ladies, don't dress like men. Behave like ladies, don't behave like men. Raise your girls to be girlish and not manly. Raise your boys to be manly and not girlish. Do what is right before God and what is according to the nature of things that God built in. And this alone is a martyrdom. Just fulfilling the commandments is a living martyrdom. On top of that, staying faithful to Catholic tradition. And that means also, staying faithful to Catholic tradition means also you got to oppose the direction of the new SSPX, the new Society of St. Pius X, which I just call what it is really, the Conciliar Society of St. Pius X. I stay with the old traditional Society of St. Pius X. There is a true Conciliar SSPX. And you'll notice the pamphlets that are available in the back. Please take these and read these. These are all just a summary of Archbishop Lefebvre's own words regarding this whole steps towards the agreement and compromise with modernist Rome, and how Archbishop Lefebvre absolutely would oppose this, and how he says very clearly, when people ask me, said Archbishop Lefebvre, when are you going to make this agreement with Rome finally? When are you going to come at peace? Stop causing division. Stop being judgmental. Stop being a thorn in the side and political. And Archbishop Lefebvre said, it's very simple. When Rome proclaims the kingship of Christ, when Rome professes the Roman Catholic faith of all time, and condemns the errors of Vatican II and all its heresies in the new Code of Canon Law and the new Mass, then yes, that's the time. And when that does happen, it's not going to be us coming in back into the church as if we were outside of it. It's going to be those men of the church who have abandoned Catholic tradition. It'll be them coming back to the Catholic faith, to the Catholic Church, where we have always stood. Where we have always stood by the grace of God. So, Tom and Bonnie, by the grace of God, you've always stood in the Catholic tradition. When Vatican II hit, you saw something was wrong. And in Syracuse here, you all gathered around a faithful old priest. What was his name? Father
Hotal, Ferdinand
Hotal, yes. And he stayed faithful, and he died. And then Father Williamson was, at the time, in 1985 or 6, he was the first to come and bring Mass. And I was just in high school in Ogdensburg at the time, and I remember seeing it on the news. It was a news flash, Father Williamson, and here's this traditional priest saying Mass in Syracuse, and it was his Mass, I think, in the Union Hall, his first time. And that's when I myself was discovering what seminary to go to. I was in high school, and all the seminaries were rotten and teaching modernism. So Father Williamson in those days was the first to bring the Society's traditional Mass here. And in those days the Society was good and strong. And so you've always been, of course, faithful to our Blessed Mother of Fatima, and continue to do so. And pray and be faithful to that message of Fatima and spreading that message of Fatima. That was the complaint of Sister Lucia back in 1957 in her last interview. And I'm convinced it was her last interview, because that interview didn't sit well with the modernists in Rome, because she said Our Lady is extremely sad because the good are not listening to the message of Fatima, and the clergy especially, and she said the bad just continue in their sins, offending God. And she said in this interview, she gave a little prophecy of things to come. And she says, don't count on the clergy and the bishops and the hierarchy on calling you to prayer and penance. Why would she say that? Unless there's going to come a time when the hierarchy abandons the faith. And as Archbishop Lefebvre saw eye to eye with these modernists, he could say, Rome has lost the faith. Rome has lost the faith. It is certain, it is certain, it is certain. You'll see that quote in there. Very powerful. And he was convinced. And once you change on doctrine, St. Paul says it in his epistle, once men abandon the true God and the true faith, they easily fall to the most despicable and foul vices. And this lavender mafia, which has invaded our hierarchy, is a scandal and must be cleaned out. Normally, when a priest, for example, is guilty, truly guilty, after a fair trial and found truly guilty, he must be removed from the ministry. There is no question anymore of letting him continue saying Mass and giving the sacrament. He must be removed. This is just the way it is, if he's truly fairly given a fair trial. And of course, we know there are many false accusations. I know a few priests who also have been falsely accused, and they're innocent before God and before people. But when they're truly falsely accused, they must be removed. There's no doubt about that. And we know that the seminaries were infiltrated. They let the good men leave. They expelled the good young men, and they took in all these fifis, which was a disaster. A total disaster. So Sister Lucia foresaw this. And she said, don't count on the hierarchy to call you to penance and prayer. You're going to have to survive on your own. It's going to be what Archbishop Lefebvre called Operation Survival. And that's why he consecrated the 4 bishops. And he told them, don't go seeking any agreements with modernist Rome. Don't make any dialogue and all that until Rome comes back to tradition, until we have a perfectly Catholic Pope. Those are his very words. Don't do anything with modernist Rome until we have a perfectly Catholic Pope. Now, what's so hard about that directive? Is Pope Francis a perfectly Catholic Pope? My goodness, that's an obvious answer. It's not the time. It's not the time. And yet, the leaders of the society want peace. They want to stop being abnormal. They want to stop being looked at as a thorn in the side. They want to stop being the dog barking and being shot at from all angles, but still barking. They don't want that anymore. They want peace. And it's a peace at a price of betraying our divine Lord, betraying the truth. And now the voice, the only voice in the world that stood as a unit against modernism and the whole collapse of the modern age, was the Society of St. Pius X and a few family traditional orders with them and a few handful of independent priests. But once they cave in, who's left? And that's a big victory for the modernists. They want Catholic tradition shut down. They don't want it. They don't mind granting the Latin Mass, as long as the priest is a good boy and doesn't say anything against Vatican II, against the new Mass, against the scandals of Pope Francis and the Pope Benedict XVI and these Vatican II popes, and attacking especially the scandals of the local diocesan bishops. They don't want that anymore. And what's very sad is the leaders have agreed to this. And I was here in Syracuse in 2012. I was in the priory with Father Stanich. He showed me the facts that said, no longer can you preach against the agreement with Rome. You have to have permission now. And that's like a dentist telling his nurses under him, you have to have permission before you can open anyone's mouth. Well, that's just part of their job, working on teeth. It's part of our job to defend the faith and preach against a false agreement with modernist Rome. That's part of the defense of the faith. And the Archbishop Lefebvre warned us the greatest danger threatening our faithful is to put ourselves under these local diocesan bishops. And you think here in Syracuse they're using that Catholic Church without the bishop's permission? No way. You think those priests are going to stand in that pulpit and condemn the very errors of Vatican II and New Mass against these local bishops? They're going to watch their words, believe me. And that's the danger of the liberal pressure of silence. Silence the opposition. That's a huge communist tactic, and it's working. So, Tom and Bonnie, congratulations, 60 years of fidelity. You might have another 60 years, God knows. God knows. But be faithful, and right after the sermon, you're going to renew your marriage vows. You're going to exchange rings again, like you did 60 years ago when you were young and sparkling. But now you're a little older, but your souls are sparkling more than ever. And may your shining example be a light for the whole world. May it shine for the whole world. Fidelity, fidelity, fidelity. But fidelity, the strength of fidelity comes from the faith, comes from the Blessed Mother, comes from fidelity to the true sacraments, to true Mass, the daily rosary, the daily battles. And we all know behind 60 years of fidelity, there's a lot of tears, there's a lot of work, a lot of forgiveness, a lot of sweat. We all know that. And that's why it's so glorious. That's why marriage, fidelity in marriage to old age is so glorious. And may your grandchildren be your crowns in heaven. And may your light speak to them. And just as these two martyrs, after they died, faithful to their vows, so much happened from that fidelity. So may your fidelity to your vows make your grandchildren strong in the faith. And realize we must be faithful to Catholic tradition in the line of Archbishop Lefebvre. And no phony compromises with error, with Vatican II, with the new Mass, and just being happy to have our Latin Mass, but forget about Christ the King. And that's what Rome wants. They don't mind giving you an altar, having your Latin Mass, SSPX. Sure, you can have your Latin Mass, But in the same pantheon of the Vatican II Conciliar Church, they've got the altar of the Anglicans, the altar of the Buddhists, the altar of the Muslims, the altar of the Protestants, all sorts of altars, even atheists, as Pope Benedict invited the atheists to Assisi in 2010. What a scandal. They don't mind putting Christ on an equal level with Barabbas. But you declare Christ as king. You declare that all the civil governments and the laws must reflect and show glory to Christ the King and conform to his commandments and proclaim his Catholic Church that he founded, then you're really rocking the boat. Then you're really, that's too far for them. And they don't want Jesus Christ the King to reign again. They want him finished. And that's why Archbishop Lefebvre said the first effect of Vatican II was destroy the Catholic constitutions of all the Catholic countries left in the world. Italy in 1984, Philippines in 1992, Colombia in 1986. And once they removed these Catholic constitutions, what happened to these once glorious Catholic countries? Protestants poured in, Buddhists, Muslims, and abortion clinics opened. Euthanasia is being pushed. All the sodomite agenda, all the corruption of the West poured right in. And this is the disaster of Vatican II, making atheist states. So in this atheistic world foretold by Our Lady of Fatima, Tom and Bonnie, continue to shine. And may your rest of your marriage days, however many God wills, continue to shine. And in the day of your death, may you be found faithful. Continue praying the rosary, and may your fidelity inflame your children and grandchildren and all of us traditional Catholics. We need all of these good examples before our eyes of fidelity. So we'll go now to renew your vows, give you the blessing, and you're going to reunite your whole marriage and all your intentions to the sacrifice of Christ on the altar here very soon. May Our Lady bless you, put her mantle over you and over all of you to persevere to the end. O Mary, conceived without sin. O Mary, conceived without sin. O Mary, conceived without sin. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen.